All right, so last week we finished up with the giant despair, and we saw that the key of promise was the thing that opened up even the most difficult doors. After days in their timeline, days of beating themselves up, of staying in this dungeon, of suffering through the dungeon, now they're finally through, and they start this journey again. So let's pick up there in Delectable Mountains. And then they went till they came to the Delectable Mountains, which mountains belong to the Lord of that hill, which we have spoken of before. Now, these mountains, actually, he saw once before at the Palace Beautiful, which, if you don't remember, I don't blame you. It's been a long time. But that was almost at the very beginning of the journey. And they took him up to the top on his last day. And they said, here, look through this telescope. And as he looked, he could see these great, beautiful mountains way down the road. And we talked about it at the time. And what that was picturing was a time later in his journey. And now we've reached it, right? But it's not just later in his journey. It's also later in time. Right? He's now kind of an old man. He's a gray hair who's walked with the Lord for so long. He's dealt with the dungeons. He's dealt with the Apollyon. He's dealt with the Adam the first. He's dealt with these temptations, and now he's continuing on. And this is what they wanted him to see. At the very beginning of his journey, they wanted him to look forward and say, there's a day closer to the end of your life than you are at the beginning. One day that you're going to be needing to be ministered to again. But now it's a different time, okay? It's a different time of life for them. So they went up to the mountains to behold the gardens and orchards, the vineyards and fountains of water, where also they drank and washed themselves, and did freely eat of the vineyards. Now there were on the tops of these mountains shepherds feeding their flocks as they stood by the highway side. Now as we look at these mountains, there were gardens and orchards and vineyards and fountains of water. What does that sound like that we've seen already? The river of God, right? It looks beautiful. It's feeding them. It's comfortable. It's nice. It's pleasant, right? But what was also very nice and pleasant and wonderful? Well, Bypath Meadow. Okay. So what do? They've got a decision to make already. Okay. So we're setting that up. But also there's this just beautiful time. Now this is the difference between Bypath Meadow and the mountains was here on the tops of these mountains, shepherds were feeding their flocks and they stood by the highway side. Now if you were looking for by the highway side, that could be a couple things. As you guys look at this book, who stands by the highway side? Okay. Right. Where was Demas? Where was Apollyon? Right. Eventually, Apollyon straddled the highway and said, "This is mine," showing dominance. So again, we've kind of got two pictures that we're starting to see, and what has to happen for these two pilgrims to advance? Well, they have to have discernment. They're in this beautiful, lush garden, but we've already seen that go bad, and they've got these men on the side that seem to be gentle, kind, and nice. They're shepherds, but we've also seen that go bad. Okay, but at the same time. There was a joke told years ago by Rick Wilson of a man who, the floods come and they've got to rescue. The only way they can rescue people is to airlift them out, they got to get them out somehow, right? But the floodwaters are rising, so he climbs outside, and his friends drive up and say, "Come on, man, we're getting out of here before the waters get too high." He goes, "No, you know what? God is going to deliver me. I totally trust that God's going to deliver me from this." And so they drive off, and then the waters come up a little bit higher, and now he's sitting in the top of a tree saying, "Hey, come on," and some guy comes up in a raft and says, "Jump in, come on, man, we're going, we got to get out of here." He goes, "No, I believe that God's going to rescue me. God's going to rescue me." And so he stays in the tree, and the guy goes off, and then now he's standing on the very top of his roof. The water's rising. There's nowhere else to go. And now a helicopter comes in and drops a ladder and says, "Come on, you don't have much time." And he goes, I firmly believe that God's going to rescue me. And so they have to go, and then the guy drowned. And then he stands before God and says, "I had faith that you were going to rescue me. Where were you when the floods came?" And he said, "Who do you think sent you the truck, the boat, and the helicopter?" Right? So it's one of those things where we have to be careful that we're not so cynical, or we have no other way that God could possibly do things. And so you walk by these guys saying, "There's no way this can be good for me. There's no way these shepherds are any good. I'm going to walk by because I've already been burned a bunch of times. I don't want to let these guys do it again." right? We can be overly critical on that side, overly protective. Or the other side is, oh, hey, these guys look so nice and wonderful, I'm going to go that direction again. And now you become totally trusting, right? In between there, we have to have that discernment. We have to be able to see what God is providing, and we also have to be able to perceive temptations and pitfalls. They don't all masquerade, they don't all come with labels. Sometimes we have to discern, okay? And that's the situation here. We've already seen them get burned a couple times, and we've seen them benefit a couple times, and now they're again stuck at another place. But this is good. How they're going to deal with the situation is going to be very instructive for us. It's going to be very good. They're growing and they're learning. Now, one thing about these shepherds are good. So I guess this is a spoiler. But these shepherds are feeding on their flock. They're feeding their flocks, and they stood by the highway side. Now, if they're pastors and they're standing by the highway side, what are they doing? What do you think? Why would he describe them standing by the highway side?
They're close enough to talk to travelers as they're walking by.
Good. They're close enough to talk. What else does that invoke?
Warn them.
Huh?
Warn them.
You think they can warn them? Encourage them. Right? You guys are all hitting all the right topics, right? They're close enough to the highway side that they can minister to passing by pilgrims. They're in the right place. They're at the place where they can be most useful. They are where they are going to find believers. But at the same time, they're also feeding their flocks. So these are men, these are faithful shepherds that are not just all about teaching. They're not just all about sitting there with their flocks trying to feed them, but they're also not just evangelists sitting there on the highway side spreading the gospel and then sending you on your way. These guys are doing both. This is what a faithful shepherd looks like. They are right in the place where they need to be when the people need them most. But this is what's also important is we talked about the timing of this is not coincidental in Bunyan's writing. This is at the end of their lives. So as these shepherds are feeding their flocks and they're on the highway side, who are they looking for? Well, they're looking for elderly pilgrims. Pilgrims that are getting on in their journeys, that have walked for a long time, who are getting a little bit weary, who are tired, who are needing that encouragement to make it over the finish line. These are the guys that have to be ministered to because, well, it's tough. It's tiring. It takes a lot to continue to fight this battle day after day, year after year, as your body starts to break down, as the battle wounds start to mount, as all the things all the screw-ups, you don't forget them. They just keep mounting up. And there's so many things that the devil can do, so many things that your mind will play tricks on, telling you to question God because of look at all the things you've done. Look at all the false words you've said. Look at all the lustful thoughts you've had. Look at all the times you were discontent. How many of those things just rise up in your head, and the longer you live, the more of those you have, right? And that can be tough. So these shepherds are coming by. They're hanging by the highway side specifically so they can minister to aging, weary pilgrims. Does that make sense? So that's going to be our theme for the rest of the book. Now, MacArthur said this, the measure of a church, the character of a church is not made known by how well it entertains young people. The character of a church is made known by how well it embraces old people. The character of a church is not how well it can capture the lighthearted who are alive and young. It's how well it can capture and hold the heartbroken, the grieving. How well it does with how does it deal with suffering? How does it deal with old age? How does it deal with cancer? How does it deal with love? Loving people at the worst times of life. That's the measure of a church. Anybody can draw a crowd. Anybody can put on an event. Anybody can do a rock concert and attract young people who are just looking for the next gig. The measure of a church is how does it sustain relationships with people all the way to the grave. Fully embrace them, love them right unto death. That's the measure of a church. The measure of this church cannot be known by sitting here on a Sunday and listening to that's going on up here. The measure of this church is seen in the hardest times of life, the most grievous times of life, the agonies of life, long drawn out slow deaths or terrible accidental deaths. And how this church embraces people at the low points and the hard points of life, that's the measure of a church. So, the pilgrims therefore went to them, and leaning upon their staves, as is common with weary pilgrims when they stand to talk by the way, they asked, whose delectable mountains are these? And whose be the sheep that feed upon them? And the shepherds said, these mountains are Emmanuel's land, and they are within sight of his city. And the sheep also are his, and he laid down his life for them. Now, This is important because one of the things that we notice is when they don't, when the pilgrims are less than discerning, is usually when they stop asking questions like, who are you? What are you up to? Where are you going? Where have you been? Right? They just take them as, hey, that guy, where are you going? Celestial City. Me too, let's go. Remember that? And they just go. There's no questioning, there's nothing, there's no discernment. And yet here they stop and say, who are you and where are we? And these shepherds say, this is Emmanuel's land. Okay? Now, and it's within sight of the celestial city. So what are they saying and what are they not saying? Because this is kind of important. What is this place?
It's near the end, but it's not the end.
Okay, that's really key, right? What is this not? Well, it's not heaven. It's not heaven. It's glorious. This is the church. In this case, we're going to be being a church. It's a beautiful place, full of glory, full of grace, full of faith. But it's not the end. It's not meant to be the end. It's not the destination. It's still just a stop in the journey. Okay? But what is it? Well, it's Emmanuel's land. So what is Emmanuel? What does that mean, first of all? What's Emmanuel? God with us. So if this is Emmanuel's land, then what is this place as these shepherds view it? Yeah. This is a special place. This is a church. This is where God specifically manifests himself, where he is viewed, where he can be seen, where it's supposed to be ministered, where he comes to his people. This is Emmanuel's land. It's not heaven. That is also Emmanuel's land, if you want to look at it that way, but that's obviously different. That's a celestial city. This is Emmanuel's land. It's close. You can see the city from here. You're almost at the end of the journey. And that's what our ministry is to the older people, to the people that are still fighting, but not quite there yet. But the fact that they ask it, and the fact that these shepherds identify the fact that we are not heaven, tells you a lot. Because that tells you that all we're trying to do is get you across the finish line. We don't want you to stay. That's a sure way to being able to root out a false teacher. If they say, here's where you're going to find the truth. You need to be here all the time. This is the place. This is the place. And they never point you to anything greater. And they never let you go. If you want to go somewhere different, they always have issues with you going somewhere else. That's a problem. Because then they look and say, this is the destination. This is heaven. When we all know it's not. These guys realize that this is a great place to be, but it's not the last place you're going to be. And they want to push them forward. So that's what we're looking for in shepherds. They're great to be around, but they're also not happy they have you stay. I need you to move. I want you to continue on your journey. Okay, that doesn't mean that you have to church hop. What he's saying is, as long as you're at your church, physically, that's fine. You can live here and die here in the Southside Bible Church. That's fine. But you can't be satisfied to just say, this is all Christianity is to me, is Southside Bible Church. Right? Where are you going with your journey? Are you growing? Are you ministering to the people that are around you, your neighbors, your workplace, fellow coworkers? That's the word. Coworkers. What are you doing? Are you growing or are you stuck? Okay? So Christian said, is this the way to the celestial city? And the shepherd said, you are just in your way. How far is it thither? Shepherd said, too far for any but those that shall thither indeed. That's a weird word. Christian said, is the way safe or dangerous? Safe for those for whom it is to be safe, but transgressors shall fall therein. So you notice that a lot of these questions are kind of yes or no, or they should be very simple answers, and they're not getting simple answers back. Okay? They're using words like thither, which is a hard word to say if you try to say it. So the shepherds are giving these answers, and they're in a way that are actually really informative. And it seems weird, but look at the way that they're asking. First of all, the fact that Christians asking is encouraging. And so they ask this question, is this the way of the celestial city? Shepherd said, you are just in the way. So it could have been easier just to say, yes. But instead they say, you are just in the way. Okay? What is the difference between saying yes and encouraging them to continue on their way? Okay? See, that's what's going on. It's ambiguous to a degree, but it keeps the focus on the journey. You are on the way. You are on the correct path. Continue on the path. You are on the right path. Instead of just saying yes, they're saying continue on the path. It's subtle, but you see where he's going with this. How far is it thither? How much further is it? Too far for any but those that shall get thither indeed. So the question is, in our words, how much farther do I have to go? And the answer is, too far for any but those that will make it. Now that's a bizarre answer to the question. How far is it? Too far for anyone else but those that make it. Well, yeah, that kind of seems like it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It's good. Those that don't make it won't make it. That's true. That's essentially what he just said. But why is that statement profound? Too far for any but those that make it.
For God's elect, you will cross the finish line. Those who aren't God's elect, it doesn't matter how much willpower or effort you put into it, you can't save yourself.
Exactly. Does that make sense? You want to cross that finish line, you want to end up in the citadel, the celestial city, you'll make it. But if you're not his, it doesn't matter how far this journey is, you'll never make it. So their trust, again, they kept him on the way. Now their trust is, again, not on the journey, not on the answer, but on the object of the answer. It is who's going to get you there. Stop thinking about the brick in front of you and start thinking about the destination. Start thinking about who runs that city. That's what he really wants you to get at. They keep pointing him back to, keep your eyes up, keep going, keep remembering who this way is about. That's what these shepherds keep doing. This is how we know that they're faithful. Now this question's great. Is the way safe or dangerous? And the shepherds say, safe for those to whom it is safe, but for the transgressors, transgressors shall fall therein. Now, it reminded me of Chronicles of Narnia. If you guys remember, if you've read a book, at one point Susan and the group are all sitting with Beaver. And they're in the cave and everything, and they talk about Aslan coming back, and this is so exciting, and they don't really know who Aslan is at this point. And so Susan asks, oh, he's a lion, okay. Is he safe, right? And so if you remember the book, when Susan says, is he safe, what is she really asking? Is he tame? But what does that mean?
Is he incapable of hurting me?
Right. Is he weak? Is he incapable of hurting me? Is he nice to be around? Can I pet him? Will he snuggle up next to me? Right? That's what she's asking. Is he a lion? By lion, do you mean like a stuffed animal? That's really what she's asking for, right? Because she's full of fear. She doesn't know what to expect. And so she says, is he safe? Okay. Is he comfortable? Is he not difficult? Can I be okay with him? And Beaver says, Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Oh, said Susan, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. Okay, that's one of the best parts of the book, I think, just because it really summarizes who he is. And that's exactly what the shepherds are trying to say. You want to know if he's safe. You want to know if he's easy. You want to know if he's cuddly and warm. I tell you what, he's not safe in that sense. For transgressors, he is their worst enemy. He will take them down. He will slay them. He will throw them into the pit. He will be their worst nightmare. But for those that are his, he's as safe as can be. Because all that power that slays the wicked is now in your favor to bring you across that finish line, to do you good. It's all there for you. So is he safe? Not in the word that Susan wants. He's not warm and cuddly and everything else. Is he safe in the sense of non-dangerous? For those who he has redeemed, yes, he's non-dangerous, because he's taken it all for you. He has redeemed the curse on your behalf, and now he is in your court. He is yours. He is absolutely safe in that sense. Not because he's non-threatening, but because he has dealt with his wrath himself. Okay? So, again, safe for those for whom it is to be safe. That's God's choice. But the transgressors shall fall therein. Is there in this place any relief for pilgrims that are weary and faint in the way? And the shepherds say, the Lord of these mountains hath given us charge not to be forgetful to entertain strangers. Therefore the good of the place is before you. So they accept the answers. They like them. And they say, this is great. You guys seem faithful. Can we stay here? Can we stay? And it seems silly, but early church membership is a big deal. Can we come and commune with you? Can we enter into your communion? Can we join your fellowship? They want to know. They want to be a part of it. And the shepherds faithfully say, absolutely. This is exactly what this place was made for. A pit stop for journeyers. A pit stop for pilgrims to continue on the way. So come, join in. I saw also in my dream that when the shepherds perceived that they were wayfaring men, they also put questions to them, to which they made answer, as in other places, as whence you came, and how you got into the way, and by what means you have so persevered therein. For but a few of them that begin to come hither do show their face in these mountains. But when the shepherds heard their answers, being pleased therewith, they looked very lovingly upon them and said, welcome to the Delectable Mountains. Okay? So they're going, they say, first of all, we're kind of surprised that you made it this far. MacArthur said, as the longer that I'm a believer, the fewer number of friends that I have. Part of that is because people die, everything like that, right? And part of it is just what Bunyan said. The longer someone goes in the journey, the better chance that they drop out. The false ones drop out, right? The false ones drop out. That's why these shepherds are kind of surprised. It's not many that actually make it this far. Of all the temptations that we've seen, all of them are things that appeal to us. Vanity Fair, how many people never come out of Vanity Fair? Because they get so lost in all the goods and everything else that are cool in this world that they never feel like they're going to move on. Remember, it didn't have to be just drugs and everything else. It could be family. It could be pro-life rallies. It could be a lot of different things that are good, but when they become idols, then they become bad. It doesn't matter how great the cause is. And so people just don't emerge. Demas in the silver mine, how many men have been lost to careers and money and making a living and trying to provide for their family to the point where that became an idol and they never emerged back on the faith? Right? Again, not a bad thing per se, but it became a bad thing when it changed their heart, when it came between them and their God. So you can see all the things that will strip us away. And we haven't even met atheists yet. We haven't met, we met shame. We talked about shame. But we haven't met atheists yet. We haven't met ignorance yet. We haven't met the flatterer yet. All these guys are still to come. And they all appeal to the fact that you've been walking for a long time and you're tired and you want some guarantees and you want some breaks and you want a comfortable end of life. Tell me how to deal with my pain. Tell me how to deal with the loss of a loved one. Tell me how to deal with the fact that too many of, we knew a lady named Bernice who she's lived through, I think, 3 or 4 deaths of her children. She's an old lady. And to outlive your children is tough, right? So here you are, all these things come up and you're looking for all these things to end your journey. It just makes sense. So all the things that come up that derail you, you should get to the end of your life and say, this is all about grace, because without it, there's no way anyone finishes this race. Okay. So they say, welcome to these delectable mountains. Now the shepherds, I say, whose names were knowledge, experience, watchful and sincere, took them by the hand and had them in their tents and made them partake of that which was already present. Now we'll talk about their names in a second, but look at this. I really like the way that Bunyan pictures this. These men, these shepherds, perceived that they were wayfaring men, okay? And they put questions to them. Then here they say they took them by the hand, had them into the tents to partake of what was already present. What are these shepherds doing?
Ministering to them.
Ministering to them. How? Food, yeah. What are they bringing them into? Tents. What are they doing when they look at them? Perceiving. They're perceiving, grabbing them by the hand, pulling them into the tents, giving them food. What's happening with these shepherds? Are the shepherds just going into the pulpit, preaching a sermon, and then scaling down? We had a We went to a church where they always had to have the pulpit up high. And it wasn't just for visuals. There was something about the exaltation and everything else, right? But there was something about always looking up, and then the guy always had to kind of like, come down. They had to kind of. It was always just weird to me. Like it was too. Felt like he was ascending, right? Is that what our pastors should do? Just come in and they have to teach a theologically brilliant sermon? Is it just that they always have to come in and they always have to preach the gospel in power with all kinds of, booming words? That's not what it is. They serve. They're involved. They're talking. They're perceiving. They're talking to you. They're thinking about who you are, what your situation is, what's going on in your life. What do you need best? And then so that kind of takes us to their name. Who are they? Knowledge, experience, watchful, and sincere. These are men that are using their gifts, that have been specially gifted by God. They have a purpose. They have desire. They're hip deep in with the sheep, if that makes sense. I'm a poet. That's right. Right? That should be it. Right? But they're involved. They're thinking, what does this pilgrim need? How can I meet that? Come, let's go talk about this together. Come into my house. Come into the tent. Come into this body, and let's figure out a way to minister to you guys. Right? That's what these shepherds do. That's what they encourage the flock to do. Go and find out what you need help with, and then figure out how we can help you. It's not really it's a profound but very simple view of ministry. They said, moreover, we would that ye should stay here a while and be acquainted with us, and yet more to solace yourselves with the good of these delectable mountains. They then told them they would be content to stay, so they went to the rest of their night because it was very late. Now, we don't have a ton of time, so we're not going to go through all these names, but knowledge and experience. What's the difference between knowledge and experience?
One can have knowledge but not experience.
That's true.
There's plenty of college graduates who have.
Yeah. A college degree means you have lots of knowledge. That's pretty much all it means. Right?
Sometimes not even that.
What is experience?
Having done it. Practical.
Having done it, also having
Applied the knowledge.
having applied knowledge and
Failed.
failed. You learn as much as what not to do as you do what to do when you have experience. And that's the brilliance of experience. When we had field session at Mines in chemical engineering, they have a mini fluidized bed. They have all these different things that are scaled down models of what you get at a petroleum refinery. And we had to go in and we had to do these experiments. And then we'd run the experiment all day. And then we had overnight to do all the calculations, prepare a report, and do an oral presentation the next morning. And used to be up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning trying to get it all done. It was difficult. And the professors took pride in the fact that it was ridiculously difficult. But we had to go do the fluidized bed, which in the math, it all works out, the great examples and everything else. And then we do it ourselves, and we start getting all kinds of crazy results. Because I'm like, oh man, it's only 40% efficient. That can't be right. All the book questions told us it should be 80 to 90%. That was always the answer. And so this one's 40%. And then we go and present it, and we all kind of brace ourselves waiting for the blowback. And the professor says, oh, good. So you're seeing that and most of the time you're lucky if you get 10 to 20% in real life. And so we thought we were totally wrong, but it was all that going through, hammering through the results 50 times, screwing up, throwing out these results, everything else that actually taught us what it's really like to have to deal with this equipment. Okay? It's that experience of actually having to work through it, of having to actually work with the actual thing, not just the math of it, not just the chemistry of it, but the actual machine itself. And even that didn't really prepare us completely, but that at least got us a lot more realistic, right? They had other things where you had negative heat transfer, where basically your cold water was actually making your hot water hotter. That one didn't work out as well. So, either that or we're on something real there. All right, so knowledge is understanding who God is. Knowledge is knowing. It's a knowledge of the Bible, and we're encouraged to grow in our knowledge, guys. There's all kinds of stuff that you would grow in your knowledge of the Lord. There's all kinds of stuff in the Bible. So don't rip on the fact that you have to know knowledge. Okay, there is an incredible amount of knowledge to be known, and it's important that you know it. And it's just as important that you epigenosis it, that you actually experience it, that you know who God is, and you experience who God is. Finally, there was watchful and sincere. Now those two are a little bit different though. Knowledge and experience makes sense. What is watchful then? How does watchful work with knowledge and experience?
Watching for wolves.
Watching for wolves, because experience tells him
There will be.
there will be. No, knowledge tells you there will be. Experience tells you
They have been.
there have been. And you have missed them or followed them, right? You've heard their words. You've screwed up. And so I'm watchful. I know now I've failed enough that I know what to look for. Make sense? So I take my knowledge of what I'm supposed to look for and my experience that tells me how I screwed up, and now I'm much better prepared to be watchful. So our shepherds are watchful, knowledgeable, experienced, watchful, and then they're sincere. What's the most famous sincere character that we have in our pop culture?
Abe Lincoln.
Okay, fine. Second most. Linus. Linus. What was he always doing at every Halloween? Waiting for the great pumpkin. And where does the great pumpkin come? Only to the most sincere pumpkin patch in all the world. Fine, never mind, it made sense to me. So sincerity is the idea of being single-mindedness. Okay, it's that single-mindedness. It's that desire that there's no double talk. His yes means yes, and his no means no. You know where he stands. He may not be the most knowledgeable guy. He may not be the smartest guy. He may not be the most capable guy, but he's the most honest guy. You know where he stands. You're not worried that he's going to flip-flop on you. You're not worried that he's telling you one thing while doing another. He's sincere. So our shepherds are knowledgeable, experienced, watchful, and sincere. You know where they stand. There's nothing about them that makes you sit there and say, I don't know if I can trust that guy. Okay? It's not because he's the most able. He's honest. You know where he stands. Okay? It's very clear. And these are the men that they have. So these are the shepherds. Now I saw in my dream that in the morning the shepherds called Christian and Hopeful to walk with them upon the mountains. So they went forth with them, and they walked a while, having a pleasant prospect on every side. Now the mountains are basically different lessons. Okay, they're going to take him up. They're going to teach him about different things, and they're going to go up to the next mountain. They're going to teach him about something else, and each one has a lesson for them. Now, these are the shepherds, though, and they're taking him by hand and saying, let's go walk on these mountains. So these aren't just lessons of, hey, just general principles that everyone should know. These are things, as Bunyan's picturing it, that the shepherds specifically want the pilgrims to understand. Can we have a lesson for you? Let's go talk. And so they walk with them up this hill. And they're talking about it, they're sharing everything else. So you see that fellowship continuing on. Then so the shepherds one to another, shall we show these pilgrims some wonders? So when they had concluded to it, they then took them to the top of the hill, Error, which was very steep on the further side, and bid them to look down to the bottom. So Christian and Hopeful looked down and saw at the bottom several men dashed all to pieces by a fall that they had from the top. Okay, so this is actually one of the best illustrations. The idea here is you've got this hill, and it's generally a high hill. Think of kind of Matterhorn-ish kind of hill, right? It goes up, and if you look at the Matterhorns, they're geologically, you would say that they're fairly recent hills because they're very sharp. They haven't been worn down by glaciers and everything. Well, they have been worn down by glaciers, but they haven't been eroded to be nice rolling hills like you have in the eastern United States, where their mountains are just kind of generally hills, right? Whereas here we're used to the Rocky Mountains. We're used to these steep, rocky, sharp peaks. Okay? So that's what we're looking at, these sharper kind of peaks coming up. And so they take them to the top of this peak, and while the ascent is kind of nice, on the other side is kind of a sheer drop. That's their picture that we're looking at. Okay, so they talk about, and this is the hill Error. And so they go to the peak, and they look down, and they see a bunch of dead bodies at the very bottom of this cliff. Okay, with the understanding, of course, that people went up and then fell off the edge. And Christian said, what's the meaning of this? The shepherds answered, have you heard of them that were made to err by hearkening to Hymenaeus and Philetus, as concerning the faith of the resurrection of the body? They answered, yes. Then said the shepherds, those that you see dashed in pieces at the bottom of this mountain are they. And they have continued to this day unburied, as you see, for an example to others, to take heed how they clamber too high or how they come too near the brink of this mountain. So the idea of error is scale the top of biblical truth. Go for it. Understand it. Dive into your Bibles. Test it. Try to understand. If you understand the languages, great, even better. Go for it. Understand who God is. Scale the peaks of biblical truth. Hymenaeus and Philetus, you'll find them in Acts. I think it was in Acts. And they are 2 Timothy, thanks. I'm trying to go through faster, so I'm not reading my notes as well. But they're in there, and what they're accused of is having a false view of the resurrection. And they took many with them, so they have followers. So the idea here is these guys went up and they said, here, Paul, tell us about the truth. Yes, here's the resurrection. I believe you, but here's a couple more things that we should add on to that truth. Okay? So the idea is they got up to the top of this hill, and then that wasn't good enough for them. Okay? They had to kind of go a little bit further. The Bible wasn't enough. And this is kind of difficult because the Bible doesn't tell you everything. The Bible gives you everything you need for life and godliness. It doesn't give you everything. It doesn't it's not an exhaustive view of God. It's not an exhaustive view of actually very many topics, to be honest. It tells you exactly what you need to know. And then God said, stop. That's enough. And so when we get to the point where we kind of, we've tossed it around, we've studied it, we've put our heart into it, we've prayed, and God said there's no more to know, then we're faced with a question. And the question is, do I continue with this, or am I satisfied with what God has provided to me? Is His wisdom enough? And when His wisdom to me stops, do I stop with it? And that's why the sheer cliff is great. If you go up to the edge and you decide that it's not enough, you have to have a little bit more, then what do? Right? You drop. You can't go any further. This is the top of the peak, and it's a glorious view from the top of the peak, right? If you're at the top and you're looking around, you can see some amazing things. But as soon as you decide that you have to have more, you're Yertle the turtle, and you all of a sudden drop like a rock, right? You can't have enough. And so then you drop and you die. You kill yourself and you kill everyone that follows you. And that's what Hymenaeus and Philetus are known for, is they came up with the truth of this resurrection that was beyond what was actually revealed. And they added to it, and they shipwrecked themselves, they shipwrecked all their followers. That's what the hill error is all about. It's scale it, go for it. It's hard, it's difficult, it's glorious, but stop where it stops. And that's what we generally don't do. We don't stop when we're supposed to stop. Okay? We have to allow God's wisdom to be enough. When He said to stop, we say stop. And when He said go, we got to keep going. Okay? And that's where the hill error comes from. Now, here's the question, though. Why does this matter for the Pilgrims? That's a great lesson, but it seems like it should be at the very beginning, right? When they're first learning their Bibles, when they're full of youth and energy, when they want to be able to conquer the world and write their PhD to get their doctorate in theology or whatever the degree is called, right? Why wait till now, at the end of the journey, to tell them about the hill error?
This one's specific to the resurrection, and that is looming more in their lives because they're getting closer to
Potentially.
death,
Mm-hmm.
potentially. So it's something that might be easier for them to fall for
Good.
than someone at the beginning of
Yep.
their journey.
I think that's true. I don't know if it's specific to the resurrection, although that's a good point. I think in principle, though, that's exactly what we're dealing with, right? They're later in life. And when you become later in life and everything is difficult, what do you start to want? Just a little bit more. Just give me a little bit more comfort. I want a little bit more than what I'm seeing. Because I have walked... what's that?
I'm sorry, I just had a different experience.
I want a different experience, right. I've walked with God for this long. Is there anything else? I don't like this part. I don't like this pain. I don't like the fact that my child wandered away. I don't like the fact that all the work I've done I just lost in the stock market crash. And so I start looking for things. I start looking for answers. I start looking for hope in a different way. It could be in a falsity of the resurrection, but to generalize a principle, it's just anything. It's just anything. And when you're elderly and things are hurting and things are painful, you're a little more prone to it. And you've walked for long enough that maybe you are kind of exhausted on biblical knowledge. I've read through the Bible 100 times. I know where that's going. Give me a little bit more. Give me a little bit more. I need to have a little bit more. Okay? So he's telling them, stay on this path. Look what happens when you go too far. Don't fall for the desire to have more. What God said is enough. Believe him by faith that it is enough. This is a question of faith. All right. Then I saw that they had come to the top of another mountain, and the name of this is Caution. And he bid them look afar off, and they did. They perceived that what they thought were several men walking up and down among the tombs that were there, and they perceived that the men were blind because they stumbled sometimes upon the tombs, and because they could not get out from among them. Then said Christian, what means this? So as they go into the top of the mountain, Caution. So we just finished with error, and here's caution. Are you getting a theme coming? And he said, look over there. Look, do you see it? And then what they see is basically a graveyard. And all these guys they're too far away to make out a lot of detail, but they can see that there's a bunch of men walking amongst the gravestones. They won't leave the graveyard, and we're making the assumption that the graveyard is not a destination where they actually wanted to be. So these men are basically kind of doing it's like Pac-Man, right? Where they just kind of go around this thing. They're just going around, and they never go anywhere else, but they just kind of go around in a circuit around this graveyard, and they're never leaving. So they're just walking around. And he said, what does that mean? The shepherds then answered, did you not see a little below these mountains a stile that led into a meadow on the left hand of the way? And they answered, yes. We saw it in passing. And then said the shepherds, from that stile there goes a path that leads directly to Doubting Castle, which is kept by the giant Despair. And these, pointing to them among the tombs, one came once as on pilgrimage as you do now. Okay? Even till they came to that same stile. And because the right way was rough in that place, they chose to go out of it into that meadow, and were taken by the giant Despair and cast into Doubting Castle. Okay, this sounds very familiar, right? Where after they had been a while kept in the dungeon, he at last did put out their eyes, and led them among these tombs, where he has left them to wander to this very day. The saying of the wise man might be fulfilled, he that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead. Then Christian and Hopeful looked upon one another, and with tears gushing out, but said nothing to the shepherds. So we already said the giant Despair could not kill anyone. Instead, what does he do? What was he able to do in this scenario? He put out their eyes so that they couldn't see, obviously, and their ultimate conclusion was what? Aimlessly where? Among the dead. Right? Among the spiritually dead. Which means if they're aimlessly wandering like little ghosts in Pac-Man's maze, where are they also never going? They're stuck. They're effectively spiritually dead. Even though they're alive, they're dead. They're living among the gravestones. They're living among the dead. They're never making progress again. They've lost all hope. Their eyes have been put out. Okay? And so you can see why these guys followed to tears, because they realized that could have and probably should have been us, if not for the grace of God. Right? But they said nothing. Why wouldn't they say anything to the shepherds? Huh? They're ashamed. Now, what's the problem with that? We're building up something in Christian's character. Well, not necessarily that. Because, they shouldn't have done that, right? And you should feel ashamed that you did it.
Shame and conviction.
Right.
So shame is more selfish, whereas conviction, you realize that there needed to be a turning.
Good.
But shame is more of a selfish kind of a...
Yeah, there's a kind of shame. There's a kind of shame that says, "I know I shouldn't have done that, and I feel ashamed that I did it." But the difference here is it never comes to confession. And because it never comes to confession, you try to keep it in, hoping that there's some kind of... When you keep stuff in like that, it's a self-righteousness. I don't want people to perceive me as they probably should really perceive me. I'm withholding information from them that would change their view of me. Okay? That doesn't mean that I go and tell everyone all my deepest, darkest secrets. That's not what we're saying. But here, they're gushing in tears after seeing this thing. And the thing they don't tell the shepherds is, that was us. We did that. They never told them that. They just silently suffered. Okay? So we're seeing a problem. Christian is internalizing it. He won't let that out. He doesn't want that to be known. And because he doesn't want that to be known, that also means that he'll never get ministered to. He lets it kind of be a raw, loose end, if you will. And we'll see that come back to haunt him later on. Then I saw in my dream that the shepherds had them to another place in the bottom where there was a door in the side of a hill, and they opened the door and bid them look in. Now, this is one of the most bizarre pictures in the book. Okay, they looked in, therefore. So there's just this hillside. I like to picture red rocks or something, but you guys can do whatever. It's the hill, and there's a door in the side of a hill. Think poo, right? In the 100-acre wood, where they live in trees and they just have a little door built into the tree. I don't know. If you're just looking for a visual. They looked in, therefore, and saw that within it was very dark and smoky. They also thought that they heard there a rumbling noise as of a fire, and the cry of some tormented, that they smelt the scent of brimstone. Okay, so just real quickly, let's go through this. It's very dark and smoky, and they hear the rumbling of a fire. Now, if you can hear the rumbling of a fire, and it's still dark, how big does that fire have to be that you can hear it without seeing it? It's got to be enormous, right? Now, if it's that big and you're hearing it, what are they hearing that's even louder than the rumbling of this gigantic furnace?
Cry of some tormented.
So how tormented are these people that they're hearing? How scared, how in pain, how difficult for these men is it to listen to what they're hearing? You see what this picture is? It's really kind of a bizarre picture. They're on the way to their journey. They have not reached the end yet. But here's a door that leads directly to a burning furnace that's roaring almost seemingly out of control, and people being tormented by this furnace. And then we're given this last little tip. They smelt the scent of brimstone. And which brimstone always means what in the Bible? Old school. Judgment. It's always associated with judgment. Brimstone is the smell of sulfur. When it burns, you usually get it from coal or something else out of the ground. That's why it's kind of associated, and it smells terrible. It's actually, okay, you don't need the chemistry, but it smells terrible, right? And so when you smell that, you see fire and brimstone. It's mentioned in the beginning with Sodom and Gomorrah. The brimstone rained down along with fire, and it was just a sign of judgment. Okay, so this furnace, as they're looking in, this fire, these tormented cries are the cries of people that are being tormented in judgment. Okay, and yet here they are at a door that leads directly there. It's not like you had to die and go there. Here's a door in the middle of life that leads directly to hell. Does that make sense? This is then said Christian, what means this? And the shepherds told them, this is the byway to hell, a way that hypocrites go in at, namely, such as sell their birthright with Esau, such as sell their master with Judas, such as blaspheme the gospel with Alexander, and that lie and dissemble with Ananias and Sapphira his wife. Then said Hopeful of the shepherds, I perceive that these had on them, even every one, a show of pilgrimage, as we have now, had they not. So this road, as Bunyan pictures it, is specifically for the hypocrites that pretend to love the gospel, pretend to love the Lord, but then trade it in for something earthly. Okay, Esau is kind of the odd man here. He was the son of Abraham. He was also the firstborn of Abraham. He should have had the Abrahamic blessing.
Isaac, son of Isaac.
Esau.
You said Abraham.
Did I say Abraham? Oh, yeah, that's right. So, yeah, you guys know who Esau is. Esau is the brother of Jacob, son of Isaac.
You said Abraham.
Okay, that's what. Do what I meant, right? Anyhow, he's the firstborn. He should have had the blessing. He should have had the Abrahamic covenant. That's where I was going with that. He should have had the Abrahamic covenant. He should have been in the line of Christ, if you really think about it. But instead, he sold it to his brother because he wanted some food. He was in there, and he took the promises of God. He took the things that God was blessing him, the things that were the most amazing blessings that this world has ever seen, and he traded it in for nothing. Judas, he walked with Christ. He ate dinner with him. He saw all the miracles. He traded them in for 30 pieces of silver. Ananias and Sapphira were probably there when 3,000 people were saved all at once with lightning and languages and tongues and everything else. And what did? They had to keep the proceeds, and so they lied about who they were. They took the promises, the blessings, the gospel, everything that they saw, and they chucked it because they wanted something earthly. In all of these situations, Alexander went with Paul. The implication being he was a minister with Paul. He walked. He saw churches established. He heard the gospel 1,000 times. He actually saw miracles. And yet he traded them in and left Paul's side. All of them. These are all the same thing. They all had to have this world, and they took all the amazing promises of God that they said they loved, and they traded them in because they disdained them. They were of no value to them. Okay? Shepard said yes, and they held it a long time too. And Copel said, how far might they go in pilgrimage in their day, since notwithstanding they were thus miserably cast away? Shepard said, some further, some not so far as these mountains. Then the pilgrims one to another, we had been crying to the strong, said, we need to cry to the strong for strength. And Shepard said, and you will have need to use it when you have it too. What they're basically saying is, if all these guys walked with Christ, if they knew the Abrahamic covenant, if they had seen the miracles that they saw, we have not done that. We have not seen those kind of things that they have seen, yet they walked away. How much more difficult will it be for us who have not had those huge visuals and those amazing pictures that have been put before us? We don't have that. And yet they had it and they blew it. We need grace. Okay? So now we've seen the hill error. We've seen the hill caution, where all these guys are walking among tombs. We've seen the byway to hell, where all the people that screwed up. Do you see the theme of the pictures that the pilgrims need? They're all warnings. This is what happens when you decide to turn away. This is what happens if you go too far in the wrong direction. This is what happens if you get to this point and decide to chuck it. That's so far everything that we're seeing. Okay? Bob?
Yeah. If this is kind of, because it's a sword that you have to obviously deliberately open up and jump in or walk in, is this kind of akin to the blaspheming of the Holy Spirit? You know, some people that have tasted it and then deliberately walk away from it. Is this a picture of, do you think? Or?
I don't know. I couldn't go that far. This is one of the, like I said, this is one of the most bizarre pictures in the whole book. But if you wait till next week, we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see somebody use it.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, we're going to see it used twice. Where are we at? Okay, so this is the last section. Let's finish this real quick. By this time, the pilgrims had a desire to go forward, and the shepherds a desire that they should go. So they walked together towards the end of the mountains. Then said the shepherds one to another, let us here show the pilgrims the gates of the celestial city. And if they have skill to look through our perspective glass, so they gave him a telescope. The pilgrims then lovingly accepted the motion, so they had them to the top of the high hill called Clear, and gave them their glass to look. So the only positive mountain so far we've seen is the one called Clear. But this Clear is actually supposed to give them a direct line of sight to the celestial city. In fact, here's a telescope so that you can see it even better. Then they essayed to look, but the remembrance of that last thing that the shepherds had shown them made their hands shake, by means of which impediment they could not look steadily through the glass. So they tried to look, but you know, it's a telescope, right? The old school telescopes, not the nice big, like GPS aligned telescopes, right? This is more like the Captain Jack one where they're looking through this. But as they're holding it, you know, they're so freaked out by that the side of the hill. They can't hold the telescope still. Okay, so what they see is they kind of see it, and then it kind of goes out of focus, and they kind of do this kind of thing. So they see something, they just don't see it very clearly. Okay, and they can't really perceive of it. They can't focus on it. Yet they thought they saw something like a gate, and also something of the glory of the place. So they got something, but they're not as much as they could have. Why didn't they get as much out of it? Well, if you look at the hill that they've had, they crossed a stile that should have been me. Now there are already tears gushing and everything else. They're freaked out. Then they get to this hill where here's a door that says people that leave the path, this is where they end up. So they're starting to get convicted. They're starting to think, well, hold on. Maybe that was me. Maybe that should have been me. And so now when they say, look at the celestial city where you're going, now their vision isn't quite as clear. Why? Because their hands are shaking. Why? Because they were freaked out by what they have already done. So what they have already done is starting to come back to haunt them a little bit, and it's affecting their vision. Okay? They're going to continue to be affected by their fear. And it's really going to come down to a choice of faith. Do you believe that even your bypath meadow journey and all the screw-ups that you've had, that God has actually paid for all of those? Do you really believe that? Or do you believe that He paid for everything up to the point where you believed, and then everything else from there you have to do on your own? Will you take it to your dying day that everything has been paid and that you owe nothing? And there's nothing you can add. And there's nothing more that you can do. Do you really believe that? Do you really believe that? That's the question that Christian is being asked, not so subtly. Then the pilgrims, went their way and sang the song, thus by the shepherds secrets are revealed, which all from other men are kept concealed. Come to the shepherds then if you would see these deep things hid and mysterious be. All right, so we're going to stop there. There's one little section that we'll finish up really, really quickly at the very end next week, and then we're going to continue on. We're going to meet ignorance. And ignorance is going to be a character that we're going to just kind of do a brief overview next week. So we're actually going to try to finish this one and get through 2 more next week. So come ready, right? We'll see how far we make it. But we're going to meet ignorance, and then we're going to keep going through, I forget. We'll see. Okay.